Real Country 1430 AM and 1073 FM WRDN. I'm Bryan Winnikins. This is the WRDN Morning Farm Report. Joining us this morning, Bryan Doherty with the Total Farm Marketing, and we're going to talk a little bit about markets today. And thank you to Compeer Financial, along with Animal Wellness Center of Buffalo Valley, Annabis Silo, Osteoplastics, Synergy Co-op, and A&J Agronomy. They are our Newsmaker interview sponsors. And Bryan, well, thanks for joining us today. Well, first, we recorded this on the 19th at the end of the market day. Milk markets kind of stabilized after the craziness from last year, but I think there might be some warning signs in the markets.
Oh, I think there's some warning signs, and it's production. We're just, we've been at this for a long time, and you and I've talked about this a lot, that if you really stop and look at the production capability that our producers today have versus even a decade ago, or particular 20 or 30 years ago, it's been a revolution. And so when you get high prices, you get some natural expansion when you have good foodstuffs. And for the most part, we've had good crops in the dairy producing regions, so there's feed availability. I think that's our biggest wet rag, is just we're good at what we do, and I'm throwing myself in that clump, and clumping myself in there and say we're good. Dairy producers are just really good at what they do, and they've got a lot of people helping them. Don't underestimate the demand markets worldwide, especially as we come out of COVID. But still, it looks like the market has a couple of times now been, way at the forefront of that, and then we kind of get the rug pulled out from under us. And yet those rallies, I think, have kept the production cycle active and alive. And the last several production reports have indicated that.
Along with dairy and the other commodity markets, how big of a factor will be any future government purchases, CFAP programs and all that? Is that going to still play into this?
It will, and I've always said over the years, don't try and spend too much time trying to outguess what politicians are going to try and outguess. But there's going to be some support out of this. There will be, what the numbers actually turn out in the timetable for when we see this support. But there will be support. But we've got to recognize that when these things do cycle back into the market, I think now twice the market has kind of got a taste of it and realized, the bears are ready to go when this comes in, because they know this is short-lived. Whether it's a 2-month window or 6, it still has a short-lived shelf life, and that would be sort of the buzzword I'd use: the shelf life of higher prices. If we can get those deferred months in particular back in the $18 area, I think they're worth defending now, but it's definitely worth defending if we get them back into that window.
Talking with Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing today. And Bryan, we're starting to see some reports and potential rumors as well about Chinese purchases. And, the market goes up when these purchases are announced. But I've always thought, well, big deal, because they can just turn around and cancel them. And now we're starting to hear some rumors that there could be some cancellations coming.
That's the nature of any type of deal with a foreign country, in particular one as big as China, that we always have to be prepared for. So you and I try and figure out, or I try and figure out, other analysts try and figure out, advisors try and figure out, well, what happens if. So it's also not to get too deep in the weeds here, but it's if something happens, then how do we? So it's an if and a how. So how does a producer handle that? How do we handle that? So I think the best we can do in this environment, where where sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. Other times it's just rhetoric in the marketplace, and sometimes I think they're balloons floated by foreign countries to see if they can't get the market to press back a little before they come in and maybe purchase more. They're buyers at heart. So I think we want to push the emphasis on the buying. I don't want to, on this interview, I don't want to go on a limb and say, well, China's going to cancel orders, we need to run for the hills. I think the things that bother me a little bit in China that the last month have surfaced is probably, well, 3 things. A little bit, again, instability with some political things. 2, COVID. And 3, African swine fever. And when we start hearing about cancellations, where is it? Just in dairy products, or could it be in soybeans or meal, or DDGs or ethanol? So far, all year, if you've watched carefully, there have been some adjustments, and there was a cancellation of corn a couple weeks ago, but the net change is a massive influx of inputs into that part of the world, and the benefactor has been the US and other countries.
Talking with Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing this morning. Bryan, one of the things you and I have talked about over the years has been the Chinese agricultural statistics. There, here's what they have in corn, or at least this is what they're saying. And a lot of times we've talked about their corn carry out, or their corn supply that they have in state reserves. We've heard that they've had to use a lot of that, but what do you see, or what have you heard regarding that? And can those numbers even be reliable?
I don't think so. I think the pantry's empty. I think if we go back, what was it, 3 years ago? I want to say you and I were together at the NAFB, the National Association of Farm Broadcasters. I think that was 3 years ago, or maybe it was 4. I don't remember now, but I want to say 3, when the big upward revision of Chinese stocks came on a USDA report in November, and it was like, oh my goodness. I think it was in November, so I might be mixing up my Novembers and Januaries, but regardless, it hit the market so hard and it flattened out corn prices, I think, for 3 years worldwide and in the US. And industry experts said, well, that might be the case, but how good of quality corn can you have? And now we fast forward to 3 years. The Chinese this year said they had close to an average crop, and yet they had two typhoons to deal with. They had a dry stretch. They had locust issues. And all of a sudden, they've got record high internal prices for corn, and they're releasing wheat out of reserves to meet corn demand. So I think those revisions upwards were what they were. I'm not so sure why they were so heavy, but it did really make a difference in the long run because that country has utilized its corn supply. It is in dire need of inventories, that we can tell, and I don't even know price is a factor. I think they just buy what they when I say they, I'm clumping all of China into one they as a whole, they buy what they need to buy to get by. And the hog herd is, if you've seen anything, if you go on the internet and look at these magnificent hog facilities they have, and how fast that hog herd has rebounded from African swine fever of 2 years ago. Now it seems to be surfacing again, so that's a little bit of a concern. But they have state-of-the-art facilities that need state-of-the-art feed, not backyard scraps.
Wow. Talking with Bryan Doherty again with Total Farm Marketing this morning. Bryan, with the increasing demand and especially for beans and corn, is there concern that our carryouts aren't going to be large enough to meet all of that demand?
Wow, that's a very insightful and great question because I've wondered, and sometimes when you look at a market, you kind of scratch your head and go, "Gosh, I wonder why it isn't moving." And you kind of look at the beans the last month, and they had this big uptrend. And when you look at the, the decreasing carryout number, and again, just for quick reminder, you take all the supply, all the demand, put it into one formula, and you get something left over. That's called carryout. So that's how much product is left or how much inventory is left at the end of the marketing year, which in soybeans and corn, it's August 30th. So you've got 120 million bushels. If you take that and divide it by usage, this is called stocks to usage. That figures at 2.6%. Historically, the bean market, when it has experienced that type of low percentage over if we go back 15, almost 20 years, the market has traded to $15 or higher. So all of a sudden here, it's kind of stalled out here in the last month. So why is that stall in place? Well, is it that China's about done buying? If you run the numbers, China's bought, or the US has already sold 96 and a half, might even be a little bit higher than after today's export sales number, but let's go 96.5% of the projected sales for the year. So why is the market not moving higher? Well, either we're, too impatient and it'll get there, or you've got a big supply of beans coming out of South America. And that's really the story. You've got that crop coming out of South America. But I have wondered, Bryan, to your point, as we moved into January, we saw things start to scream higher on price and seeing carryout dropping lower. If the new administration has really got a handle on maybe our own food security, and when do we run out of inventory and have to ration it? 120 million bushels, that's less than I think that's less than pipeline. That's like 10 days worth of supply, and you better hope you got your crop coming in the first part of September.
Talking with Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing this morning. Bryan, is an acreage war starting with corn versus beans? And I guess let's throw wheat in there as well, just because they want to join the party.
Well, let's throw wheat in because the party has a little wider open door right now. In particular, you wonder about this cold weather event and what that might do to a certain number of acres, and then you look at where spring wheat prices are and kind of look at where beans are and corn are, and a lot of prevent acres that were up in the Dakotas the last couple of years. Are they going to go to wheat? So you bet. I think we've got a price war that has just been brewing. It's been steadily favoring the bean market. The percentage, if you take the price of November beans divided by December corn, that ratio is 2.60 historically. When it gets to about 2.45, Bryan, 2.50, you start to see acres migrate over to corn. So in my world, though, I have a little different thought process that I think that's true more so if you have low priced commodities because beans are a lower input cost market. When corn, I think when you start seeing where farmers can make 50 cents, 75 cents a bushel profit, I got to think the determinant of acres is how well the corn gets planted and how fast and far farmers want to go planting with the weather. So even though beans are winning out on that percentage, all of a sudden you start looking at this and what happened this last week. Corn, December corn new contract highs, and November beans testing contract highs within 1 penny at 12.02 at a high on Friday, and December corn had a high on Friday at 466 and a half. These two are starting to fight it out.
Talking with Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing this morning. Bryan, recently we saw this in the stock market with the retail traders, or those folks that are on Wall Street bets, the Reddit crowd, what the retail traders, whatever you want to call it. They targeted some very short sold stocks, but then they started targeting silver, a commodity, and that, of course, had some farmers and had other folks, myself included, going, could they try to do something like this in the commodity markets, or is that just a fear that we really that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself?
Um, it's I have a tough time personally seeing how this happens in commodity markets because I think there's a lot more behind. Or I'm going to say behind the scenes. There's a lot more now. Let's start with this. When you when you look at some of these stocks that blew up, you have this mass media that can on their phone, this guy has a couple $1,000, this guy might have five, you can get a zillion people with a few $1,000 to, let's say, chase some stocks and kind of play the game. They'll stick it to the hedge fund. When it comes to commodities, I don't want to say it can't. I know everybody's going to think, well, what about the Hunt brothers? I mean, yeah, we saw that silver back 50, 40 years ago, but the exchanges are different in the sense that they can raise the margin requirements on contracts daily if they want to slow down volatility in the marketplace, to say, look, if you're going to be into this market, you need to put up substantial money. So you would have to have, I think, a number of really, really, really big players with really, really, really deep pockets that really, really hit the market at one time trying to just run the market. And that's just a guess on my part. I don't know how else it would happen because remember in commodities, for every buyer there's a seller and you've got other things that direct prices as well. So if we get a punch higher in all of a sudden some commodity picks up, you're going to have those who can actually physically deliver want to sell, and the market, the cash market comes into play. So I don't think I can see a scenario. I guess you have to be creative in your imagination, but I don't think I see a scenario where that can happen in the commodity markets.
Is now, granted, the milk markets they're not as liquid, or they don't have as big of a trade, but is that also the other part of this? Corn, soybeans, wheat, the livestock and the hogs, there's such giant volume in this. There's just if a group of retail traders, or the Reddit crowd, are they just going to be not even a blip on the screen because it's such a big market?
It's a big market. It's a high value contract. So as I said, I mean, if I have $10,000 and I want to pay, 3 times or 5 times or 10 times what a stock is worth when it should be worth $20, and I'm willing to pay $100, and there's 10,000 of me out there that are willing to play that game, and the last guy buyer is the one that's stuck, and then everybody else will kind of head for the silent. I just don't see that in commodities. Now, to just be fair, if you'd asked me a year ago, would I see negative crude oil prices to the extent that we saw, I would have given you the same answer. I don't see how. As it turns out, that was based out of ignorance on my part because I didn't understand the delivery mechanism for one type of crude oil and one delivery point. So there was mathematically, I guess, that was out there, and it just wasn't recognizable by the marketplace. And it was a market too that generated when prices were imploding. A lot of people thought they were getting a really good deal and found out that they weren't. So, buying crude at $3 a barrel sounds great. It can only go to zero until you find out it can go well below zero. So, not
Yeah,
a
that
finite risk.
hopefully they if those contracts are farther out, they held on to them because now with it being at $60 a barrel, is that going to be the other part? Well, how will how will the energy markets play in with the rest of the commodities? Can if crude oil has been over $60, which is kind of like now is that going to cause more crude to come online? But the higher that gets, then feed costs, fertilizer costs, fuel costs all start to go up. So could that have play some effect here on corn, soybeans, wheat,
Well,
livestock?
I think absolutely. I think the stage was set last year when energy prices imploded. If you really think about sort of the potentially larger fundamental picture, is you've got an industry that is losing money in a big way. So the only way an industry stops losing money is it needs to slow down or stop producing. And when you look at the rig counts, which I don't have them off the top of my head, but if I showed you a chart, the chart would show the rig counts were, let's say, 4 times more than they are right now, or 3 times more. So what has to happen is the market goes down. These rigs shut off. Your supply begins to tighten, and it happened at a point where demand was lower as well due to COVID and everything we all know about. Well, now let's flip it the other way. We're on the verge of maybe squashing this COVID through vaccine and distancing and all this other good stuff, and people are sick of it and they're going to get out and they're going to do things and people are going to work. Prices begin to reflect more demand for energy products, but the rigs aren't coming. They just don't come online overnight. That's an expensive process to put these rigs in place. You get a new administration, not friendly to, seeing cracking and all these things. And so it creates an environment where all of a sudden your energy market might go, yeah, I mean, it might literally go from below zero in one year. It could be over 60. So who's to say it can't get to 80 or 100 within a year because you just don't have enough supply coming on board. Throw some cold weather at this thing, slow down the distribution and increase the demand. These things happen, and all of a sudden, we're looking at political changes, supply changes. You can't keep up on the pumping. Um, all that eventually falls back into the commodity markets. I'll take you back to 2008. We saw corn at $8. Corn had no business being $8, but crude oil was over $100. If you might remember, same thing. 2012 rallied up, and so the energy market has really been the spearhead of commodities moving up or down.
Oops, it's going to be. I think 2021 is going to still be another wild ride on that roller coaster, isn't it?
Well, it is, and you think about crude. It's 6 months ago was around 30. It's doubled. Think about the price of corn doubling from 3 to 6. Those things can happen. I'm not arguing that's going to happen for corn, but the setup is there when you have this momentum and money flow. We've seen a ton of money flow, and you look at a stock market, Brian. I mean, just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing, and it's people are getting so used to that is their go-to for investments. And I think the smart money is probably looking at hardcore things rather than buying overvalued equities.
And is Bryan Doherty. He's with Total Farm Marketing. And Bryan, if folks want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
We just love a phone call. 800-334-9779 is the phone call. Email us, text us. We have a great website, Top Farmer. Just type her in and Total Farm Marketing. On Total Farm Marketing is Top Farmer. That's the report that I write. So we have multiples of services on that website that you can dig into, and reports and resources. So we just love to hear from you. Check us out and either go to the website or give us a call.
It's Bryan Doherty with Total Farm Marketing. You're listening to the WRDN Morning Farm Report.